to a funeral home that has a cremation container. Not every funeral home has a cremation container, and the nearest one here in Sartell would be the aforementioned William Dingman's Family Funeral Home. The next step is to place the body into a cremation container. The body is then heated to 1400 to 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is heated for 2 to 3 hours. After this process is complete, the body is then removed, and it is the job of the mortician to ensure that all the ashes are consistent shape and size. Once this is done, the next step is to place the ashes into the urn. And the aforementioned cremation process goes on to say that the sixth and final step is to return the ashes to the family.
Stated in the aforementioned the cremation process on February 16, 2013, there are many restrictions when it comes to cremation. First, for a cremation, there must be an authorization from either the coroner or the medical examiner. This is because after a cremation takes place, you can't tell who the person is or the cause of death, so this must be cleared by the coroner or the medical examiner for these reasons. Second, if the person has a pacemaker implanted, this should be removed before the cremation because the pacemaker can explode inside the cremation chamber from the high heat. Third, as found in the article from the Internet Cremation Society published on January 5, 2013, there are many religions that do not agree with the cremation process. Some of these religions are the Islamic religion, Orthodox Jews, or either Orthodox. There are a few religions that do agree with cremation though, like the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church agrees with cremation as long as it follows the teachings that go along with the Christian religion.
According to the Internet Cremation Society website, published on January 5, 2013, there are many options on what to do with the cremated remains. The most common thing chosen to do with the cremated remains is for them to be put in an urn and placed in the deceased household in a special place. Another option for the cremated remains is for them to be scattered in a place of importance to the deceased. Another thing that can be done with the cremated remains is for them to be buried into a cemetery. They can also be placed in the cremation garden in the cemetery. The cremation garden is a place that there would be like a 3-inch by 3-inch plot that the cremated remains would be put into, and their name would be engraved on that plot. Another bizarre service, as the aforementioned went on to say, for the cremated remains is for them to be placed in a helium balloon and then set up into the atmosphere. They can also be put into a shotgun shell and shot out of a shotgun. So if the deceased enjoyed hunting, that would be a great way for you to honor them. Another bizarre thing that is done with the cremated remains is for them to be put into a firework and then shot off in a firework. They can also be put into paint, and a painter or artist can paint a portrait of the deceased or a picture of something that is of importance to the deceased. Another thing that is offered for the cremated remains that is offered by most funeral homes is cremation jewelry. It is about a locket that the cremated remains go into and is usually worn as a necklace. The cremated remains can also be sent in and made into a diamond. So someone of importance to the family could have a diamond ring, a diamond earrings, or a diamond necklace of the deceased's ashes. And the last bizarre thing that is done with the cremated remains is for a lipstick-sized tube to be sent into a place, and then it is set into a low orbit around the Earth for a set period of time. Then it will come back into the atmosphere. So the aforementioned, the Internet Cremation Society website says that there are many things that can be done with the cremated remains, and usually the person who has died chooses what they want to do with their cremated remains before they die, but if they do not, the loved one of that deceased will choose for them.
There are many unique facts about cremation, as found in the aforementioned article, The Cremation Process. First, a big reason why a lot of people choose cremation is because of the cost. Cremation costs significantly less than other types of death rituals or funerals. This is because of the simplicity of it and along with the environmental concerns. Also, cremation is very flexible when it comes to planning your funeral because you can have it at a longer time than after the person has died. A second unique fact is that the cremated ashes of a deceased person are a grayish or whitish color. Third, the average person's weight in cremated ashes is between 4 and 6 pounds. Like pacemakers that need to be removed before cremation, if a person has silicone breast implants, these also need to be removed. This is because they can explode in the cremation chamber from the high heat. Also, cremation has caused a lot of scandal in the history.
One scandal you might not know about is a forest fire that happened west of Arlington, Texas. In this forest fire, 200 people died. Half of these people were burnt to a crisp. This was also considered a form of natural cremation, and it was incredibly controversial because the religion of these people did not agree with cremation. Now that we looked at cremation, let's look at the funeral burial process.
For a funeral, there are many decisions that need to be made. As informed by the aforementioned Emily Girl on a personal interview from Williams Family Funeral Home, there are many decisions that need to be made for planning a funeral. To make these decisions, the legal representative of the family must set up an appointment with a mortician or funeral director, and the person that sets up the appointment is called the customer. The legal representative, or the customer, could be first the spouse of the deceased person. If the spouse is not available, then the next step would be the children of the deceased person. If the spouse and the children are not available, then the third line would be the parents of the deceased. If these three options are not available, then it would go to the next living relative of the deceased member. At this meeting with the mortician or funeral director, the customer must plan out the merchandise that they need for their funeral. There are different types of burials that you can choose from. There's direct burial, there's entombment, like a mausoleum, and there's also a casket, which most of us are familiar with. After picking which type they would like, they can also receive a statement at the end that goes through any of the services that they need and anything else, merchandise that they need in this statement. This was found from the New York Department of Health, A Consumer's Guide to Arranging a Funeral, on December 12, 2012.
And so the aforementioned New York Department of Health and Emily Girl, the mortician, went on to say that there are many costs involved with a funeral, and this is actually one of the most expensive form of after-burial rituals. Emily Girl went on to say that funerals can cost anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000. And this total cost comes from a lot of tiny costs that add up to this grand total. And many of these costs can be found in the itemized list of services and merchandise that the customer asks for. One main cost is the property that you have to pay for to bury the deceased. The cemetery will have a price, and often the customer has to continue to pay for this lot just like they would a house. It's a property that they'll have to own. Also, a huge cost is the casket. Caskets can cost anywhere from $800 to a couple $1,000s, and every cemetery requires a casket. Also, opening or closing of the casket, if needed, will be an additional cost. And if the family chooses, if they want to have the grave taken care of by a gravekeeper or flowers put there and just have the lawn kept up, this too will be an additional cost. Also, items that are found in the cash advance list, such as a clergy or the cemetery process itself, will have quite an additional cost. In addition, some cemeteries require an interment receptacle. This is like a vault that the grave is put into. And if the cemetery requires this, that will be quite an additional cost. Also, the funeral itself is quite a cost. To put together the invitations and the food and the funeral itself is quite a tremendous cost for the customer. Also, the customer can choose to have a topical disinfection done. This is when it's a bodily cleansing of the deceased. And this is often chosen if the customer chooses to have an open casket funeral, because there will be visitation and viewing of the deceased. So they want them to be clean and pleasant to look at, as they were before they died. Also, the customer can choose to have an embalming done, and this often is paired with the funeral when it's an open casket, because again, there will be viewing of the deceased, and they want them to look as they did before they died. And embalming is also quite an additional cost. And finally, transportation of the deceased from the place of death to the funeral home will be an additional cost.
The aforementioned Emily Groh went on to say that there are many options in burial locations. There are city-owned cemeteries, state-owned cemeteries, and federally owned cemeteries. Most anyone can be buried at any location that they would like, but they just need to abide by the cemetery's rules. Many churches own cemeteries, and in order to be buried in a church cemetery, one would need to be a member of that church. And if they are not a member, they will have to pay an additional cost to be buried there. In Minnesota, there are 2 federally owned graveyards. They are both veteran graveyards, and in order to be buried in a veteran graveyard, one would need discharge papers from the United States Army. In order to be buried there, the family can also be buried there, but they would also need the discharge papers as well. So the aforementioned Emily Groh stated that usually before the person dies, they choose where they would like to be buried, but if they do not, the loved ones in charge of the deceased will choose for them.
We just completed talking about some after-death rituals. We talked about the process of embalming, we talked about the process of cremation, and we also talked about the funeral burial process. It is very important to know about many after-death rituals. While we were speaking today, approximately 2,033 people have died.